I have been working at this chapter for a very long time. Um, this particular chapter is a fascinating chapter. I am going to try to come up with some uh, synonyms for it, but it's tricky because this has been years and years and years. I've been working at this subject. I've lost track. It's got to be somewhere in the ballpark of 10-ish years, give or take. And this particular chapter is a very, very important chapter. If you ask most people uh, where they would go in Revelation or what they would go looking for in Revelation for anything, most of the time, I think most of them would end up in this chapter. Because this chapter is home to many subjects, which we will briefly allude to. It is the source of much conspiracy, consternation, and confusion, and it is just jam-packed with cross-references and questions and answers, and it is simply and incredibly dense. And so the I was trying as hard as I could to come up with the visual, because that is by nature of the chapter what John has. And I tried a couple different AI tools, and many of them just could not seem to understand numbers. It took me forever to get it to come up with heads and faces, and I told it to put eyes and a mouth on the horn, and it simply would not do it. So even it did not understand what John meant. But this is, I think, a pretty good reference for what it is that we can use. But don't worry, we'll get into some more technical detail on it. But needless to say, what John saw was rather weird. But historically speaking, this question of world government, world religion, the end of the world, a primary antagonist showing up and being the devil's hitman, as it were, these are not new concepts to people. In fact, I would say these are one of the most sought out concepts in the world. You see it in modern literature, in culture, movies, music, TV shows, speculation. In this chapter, we will find things like the mark of the beast in 666. And of course, that's the devil's number, and people are always paranoid about it, and all kinds of fun stuff are in here. But when you really think about this subject and you decide to limit yourself strictly to the Bible rather than pop culture, you will find that the discussion of the end of the world still shows up. It shows up frequently. The idea of a singular government controlling the world is actually found in a few places. In fact, it will get so specific that God will gather all of the nations against Jerusalem. This is repeated time and time again. Instruction is given time and time again for the nations to gather. And so this question of this subject, it kind of just is everywhere. And people run with questions on this way out of left field, and then some way out of right field. And I mean, they're going to go all over the place. Any possible end of the spectrum, you will find people going to. And so this particular chapter is very dense. But we have to go back, and I cannot stress this enough, we have to go back to the very beginning, Revelation chapter 1. I'm going to this chapter because I really want to hit on this point again, and I will continue to hit on this point again. In Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, we are given the mission statement for this entire book, the whole purpose behind it. Why all of this? And what is our goal? And the reason I bring this up is because what do most people do when we get to chapters like this, especially ones that at first seem interesting, but the moment someone asks you to start answering questions, it just gets tough. And that is, well, who knows? It doesn't really matter. This isn't a primary theology, and so really we can just haggle about it for 2,000 years, and it makes no difference. This is confusing. This isn't worth the attention. And more importantly, most people seem to concede the idea that no one can understand it. But that runs directly against chapter 1, verse 1, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his bondservants the things which must soon take place. And he sent and communicated it by his angel to his bondservant John, who testified to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ to all that he saw. Blessed is he who reads, and those who hear the words of the prophecy, and heed the things which are written in it, for the time is near. This is not a book of suggestions. This is not a book for hobbyists. This is not a book for mere conspiracy, because it's not simply just given for us to have insight into the future. This is specifically given not just for us to understand what's coming. This is specifically given as a set of instruction. This is not mere theology. This is a warning. This is instruction on how to handle certain things, with the anticipation to anyone who reads and heeds these words that it must soon take place. So as much as people will misuse and otherwise abuse that, and will proceed to stretch it where it does not belong and apply it where it makes no sense, we still do not use that as an excuse to then gloss over it. This is, I would argue, just as clear and just as informative and just as important and imperative as any of the other epistles would be, because of this introduction. And so we are given this to pay attention to it. But in so doing, we need to do it correctly. We can't simply just throw out your best guess and move on, because like with any other doctrine, with any other book of the Bible, in taking it seriously, we have to buckle down and keep it not only in its immediate context, but in its overall context. And any time you reach a chapter like this, which is clearly referencing other books and other chapters and other authors, we have to understand the full thing. So, in doing so, we're going to try to go through merely, I would say, the tip of the iceberg, kind of glossing over some of these subjects just to get introduced to it. But in order to do that, we have to understand the context. This chapter is approached with more presupposition than most, if not all, other texts on eschatology, and it interacts with many other eschatological subjects or characters. So this is important to get out of the way, because that is a lot of baggage we have to untangle ourselves from. And I mean, there is a lot of baggage you have to. Any position of eschatology worth its salt has to deal with this chapter. This chapter is too specific. It is not vague enough for people to simply write off. You have to deal with it. You might, with some, try to excuse yourself by saying, well, it's kind of here and there. It's mentioned once in a while. The 144,000, well, maybe that's symbolic, maybe that's literal. But this chapter simply is not only incredibly specific here, it is incredibly specific elsewhere. It is repeated over and over and over. So we have no choice. We have to go through this chapter, and we have to do it with some kind of semblance of answer when we come out of the other side. So, keeping that in mind, it is vital that you put aside presupposition, you put aside what you think it means, not saying that you're wrong, just saying, recognize that this chapter has been so mangled up for a very long time by so many people that we have to keep our heads about us as we go through it. So, here are some of the subjects that are addressed in this chapter. We have the dragon, which is Satan. We have the beast. We have the Antichrist, the false prophet, the horn, the image of the beast, the mark of the beast, world government, world religion, the fate of the church, the book of life, false signs and wonders, resurrection, and more. All of these things are in some way or another, directly or indirectly, talked about in this particular chapter. And it doesn't stop in this chapter. It will continue on from here all the way through chapter 17. So you can't simply just take this chapter, take your best shot, and then think, okay, well, now I'm out of chapter 13, I'm off the hook, because it will hit you again, and it will hit you again, and it will hit you again, and then you go back to Daniel, and it will hit you again. And Matthew 24 references Daniel, so no matter what, you have to deal with this. You can't play ignorant here. So it hits all of these subjects, and so we have to take our time. One of the most difficult parts I had in getting ready for this particular session is not that I don't have what I think is a good enough understanding of this chapter to present it. It's that there is so much in here that I'm trying to organize it in such a way that it makes sense. So, knowing all this, we're going to try to answer in some way or another these three questions. Now, no, I do not mean fulfillment. I just mean theologically, who are these characters? Do I know who the person of the Antichrist is? No. I have my guesses, as anyone would, but we're not dealing with that today. This is not a sermon about whether or not we are fulfilling anything politically. I will let you draw those conclusions. And if you think, well, that's awfully close, maybe you have someone in mind. No, I don't. That's on you. All right. So, zero in on the first question. Who is the Antichrist? And the reason I want to start with this one is because most people, when they open Revelation 13, say, oh, the beast from the sea who rules the earth, this is the Antichrist. But the first question I had approaching that is, then why is the title Antichrist not used, not only not in this chapter, it's not used anywhere in Revelation. Jesus never uses the title. Daniel never uses the title. Zechariah never uses the title. Ezekiel never uses the title. Paul never uses the title. Peter never uses the title. Jude never uses the title. So before we jump the gun and say, oh, there's the Antichrist, well, we need to slow down. What does it actually say about the Antichrist? So I want to get all of our groundwork. We want to make all of our pieces, put them out on the table, sort through them, identify who's who and what's what, and then we'll get into chapter 13. So we'll start with the Antichrist. Who is this? And we have only 3 places this title is ever used. Only 3. And if you'll notice, it's all by the same person, and they're only in 2 books of the Bible, and rather short ones. And this is the same person who's writing Revelation, who does not use this term in Revelation. So we need to look at those. So 1 John chapter 2. And I want you to know very carefully, this is one of the difficult parts of especially eschatology, is when you are going to go through these, you really, really have to stop and pay attention to what it is saying and what it is not saying. So 1 John chapter 2, going down to verse 18, and we will be covering a lot of ground here again today, so brace for a lot of reading. Verse 18, children, it is the last hour. And just as you have heard that Antichrist is coming, singular, even now many Antichrists have appeared. From this we know that it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they were not really of us. For if they had been of us, they would have remained with us, but they went out so that it would be shown that they are not all of us. Note that right there. When people quote that, what are they usually referencing? Well, someone leaves the church, well, we have an apostasy, and say, okay, well, that's because they were never of us. And people say, well, people quit on Christ all the time. And well, that's because they weren't of us. And while that is technically correct, note the context in which that verse is used. He's speaking specifically of Antichrist having already come, which is fascinating to me because we often limit the term Antichrist to a singular man. But here John is not only using it as an anticipated figure, he's using it as figures that have already been seen, and then applies it to people who were in the church that they already knew who had left. So he uses it in that context. And then he says in verse 20, but you have an anointing from the Holy One, and you all know. I have not written to you because you do not know the truth, but because you do know it, and because no lie is of the truth. Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son. Whoever denies the Son does not have the Father. The one who confesses the Son has the Father also. As for you, let that abide in you which you have heard from the beginning. So if what you have heard from the beginning abides in you, you will also abide in the Son and the Father. And so he's basically taking the subject and the person of Antichrist and almost tying it down to a specific doctrine, a specific theology that people were buying into and then running with and then leaving the church. And we say, okay, so is the Antichrist then some guy who's going to show up and say to the crowds, Jesus was not the Christ? Well, yes and no. Again, what he's saying here is he's arguing what their theology is. That Jesus, as a person, as a historical person who they knew of, who John himself had walked with, was he or was he not the Christ? That was the pressing question that they had when he was on the scene. Is this the Christ, yes or no? Tell us plainly. And so Jesus says to his disciples and clearly educates them throughout his ministry, not only was the Christ, but he was the Son of God who would take away the sin of the world, as John the Baptist recognized. And so here, after Jesus has left, now all these false teachers are coming in, and they're effectively trying to argue, not that Jesus was a bad guy, not that Jesus said things that weren't right or weren't wrong or whatever, but rather that they were arguing that Jesus was many things but not the Christ, that he was not specifically the Messiah. Now, you can also say that maybe they say in a different way, well, yes, Jesus is the Christ, but not the Jesus you're thinking of. We have our own understanding of Jesus, and he's the Christ. So either way, it basically comes down to, is the Jesus of the Bible and what he said and what he did, is he or is he not the Christ? And the spirit of Antichrist comes along and says, no, he is not. Maybe some other version of Jesus, maybe some other person entirely, but not that one. So that's the first reference. Then we go all the way over to chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. He gives them a warning. Now here's where it gets interesting. Here's where it gets fun. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, and every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, of which you have heard that it is coming and is now already in the world. You are from God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. They are not from the world. Therefore, they speak as from the world, and the world listens to them. And who's the they he's talking about? The Antichrist who have already come. One is coming, many have already come, and they are from the world, and they speak as from the world, and the world listens to them. But we are from God. He who knows God listens to us, and he who is not from God does not listen to us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. And so this is a warning about people coming in with false doctrine, false words. You could go into the word spirit and try to dig farther into it as far as the words or the breath that was coming out and what was being said. But he's effectively saying the same point that Jude tells his readers to do, and that is to contend for the faith once for all handed down. The words that they had heard from Jesus, the words that he had entrusted to his disciples, which they then carried on and expounded on, that apostles' doctrine is the thing that we hold on to, and anyone who denies it, anyone who denies any of the clear teachings about Christ or the things that come along with that, then he is of the spirit of error, or more specifically, is tied to Antichrist. And then finally, 2 John 1:7. One little verse. For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ is coming in the flesh. This is the deceiver, the Antichrist. So he's repeating the same point. So from these only references we have to the Antichrist, notice what we're not finding so far. While he seems to be alluding to an anticipated figure, he also refers to this in the plural, that there have already been many, and that there will be many, and that really the idea of Antichrist is tied to two things, a doctrine and a spirit. And in understanding those limitations and having gone through these, I would think we can come up with just a few side effects to this, or things we can kind of draw away from this text before we get into chapter 13. So, the Antichrist is coming in the last days. He says, we know that he is coming. It is the last hour. One is coming. So he refers to something anticipated. The Antichrist was already at work in John's days. In fact, I think that's an interesting point, because to me, the ramification is that as soon as Christ left, this spirit of Antichrist comes into the world and immediately begins creating replacement substitutes. And really, that's one of the key things to remember, and we've been over this before, but the title Antichrist does not mean against Christ. It means a replacement in the stead of, a vicar or a substitute. Someone who is basically pulling off the old stereotype of swapping one thing out and putting in replica in its place, a counterfeit. And that counterfeit idea is going to carry with us through this as we go on, but that's really the idea. So when you're looking for Antichrist, you're not looking for someone who denies the existence or necessarily person of Christ. You're looking for someone who is either claiming to be him or who has claimed to have found the real one. So they were among the saints, wolves disguised as sheep. So these were not people from the outside, these are people from the inside. They deny that Jesus was the Christ. They deny the Son and thus the Father. The Antichrist is a spirit, which is a false prophet. And we'll get into that one in a minute here. It is sent out into the world, and it speaks to the world. And when going into the church, it's basically trying to find those of the world inside. And it will not confess the true Jesus as having already come in the flesh. This is the spirit of error called the deceiver and the Antichrist. These are not only titles, these are doctrines, these are ideas, these are actions, these are goals that is describing. So the Antichrist is a spirit. And if we go to 1 Kings 22, which we've done before, one of the interesting things about that specific reference is, if you remember the scene where we have the throne of God and angels all around, and God says, who will go down and make the king go to war? And a spirit comes up and says, I will do it. And he asks how, and the spirit says, I will be a deceiving spirit. I will be a deceiving influence, and I will go into his prophets, all of them, so not just one, we'll go into all of them, and I will make them basically convince him, push him over the edge to go to war. And so this idea of a spirit moving in and influencing and permeating false doctrine is not unheard of. And the Antichrist is, in my opinion, this sort of form that's taking here. He is a deceiver specifically sent to deny that Jesus was the Christ. This leaves an opening for someone else to claim the title. And so you can start to see why it's doing what it's doing. That it's not just some bad guy who likes to deny anything and everything. It's trying to create an opening. There have been many manifestations of the Spirit in the past, and there will be many appearing in the last days. So Matthew 24:25. Many will come saying, I am he. Do not let them deceive you. Don't let them lead you to other versions of Christ. And this is really important because so often when we think of Antichrist and the beast and the world government and world religion, we think things that oppose Christianity. And I think it is undeniable that it is not something which opposes Christianity. It is something which claims to be it. It is something which, if possible, could deceive even the elect. It has 2,000 years of experience of trying to create the perfect counterfeit. And so there are all kinds of variations of this spirit, of this doctrine, from the most radical, crazy sort of left-wing ideology all the way up to the closest, most conservative, most convincing, most moral, if not more moral, version of Christianity. It will use love, it will use hate, and everything in between. And so this is this spirit and what it is trying to do. It will take versions of Christ, depictions of Christ, ideas of Christ. It will take all these things and put them together to try to get you to believe in any version of Christ other than the one real one. And of course, as John alludes to, and as Jesus himself said, how are you going to know which is which? We say, well, that left-wing Methodist preacher who says that they're all for these crazy perverts, well, that's obvious. Sure. But what about the one who seems close enough? How are we going to know? And the only way to know is to know what he said, to know what he actually told you to do, and to keep it in context. And the words of God have a fascinating way of weeding out the fakes, because at some point or another, you will come across something Jesus said that you just can't take. It's just too much. Can't accept. At some point or another, it will weed out the fakes. But these guys rely on you not going that far, which is why they don't like, for example, going through any sort of expository means. Not that they couldn't, but it just would be a lot trickier to work around. So, we've answered the first question, roughly, and we will get into this later. We will get back to this subject. But for now, suffice it to say, the Antichrist is viewed as a spirit who has been at work since John's day, trying to create counterfeits going into all these different people, particularly in the churches, to create a version of Christ that will eventually create an opening, a vacuum, as it were, for someone else to say, oh, I'm the real one. So now we can zoom in. Who is the man of lawlessness? We've talked about this guy all the time. Ad nauseum when we explored this subject, but now comes the time to put it in its context here, to kind of put the pieces back together. We only have 2 references to the man of lawlessness. These 2 chapters we've gone over time and time again. The only one I'm going to cover today, since we've gone over 2 Thessalonians 2, again, ad nauseum, is to go to Daniel 11. And in Daniel 11, there's a lot of things said, but I want you to note the wording here, and specifically how it breaks down this man, his motives, what he's trying to do. And I have been working at this particular section here for a long time, and I'm still working at it. So Daniel 11, in context, at the appointed time, this last king will return and come into the south, but this last time it will not be, or it will not turn out the way it did before. 4 ships from Kittim will come against him. Therefore, he will be disheartened and return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. And just a quick note there. Notice something. Most depictions of the Antichrist have him being some confident man who just has it all worked out. But that's not the way Daniel describes him. In fact, if you go into the Greek version, it actually seems that he's somewhat sporadic. he seems almost caught off guard, because in the Greek version, when he's going to try, he's gone into the war against whoever the South is. He's beaten them once before soundly, and now he's going to try it again. But for some reason, something happens that makes him retreat. He loses. He doesn't win, he loses this and is humiliated and becomes very, very mad. He is enraged. And that makes him go and set up the abomination of desolation here. He's reacting. The abomination wasn't some grand scheme. It was a reaction. It was a fit of rage in this context. And so forces from him will arise, verse 31, desecrate the sanctuary fortress and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. But now let's get into the character of the man. By smooth words he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly towards the covenant, but the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Great, so now the saints are going to fight back against this. And those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many, yet they will fall by sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. Now when they fall, they will be granted a little help, but many will join with them in hypocrisy. Some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and speak monstrous things against the God of gods, and he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any other god, for he will magnify himself above them all. And that's important, because a lot of people say, well, he doesn't show regard for women. So what does that mean? Does it mean he's single? Does that mean he's a homosexual? That's not the point. The point is that this man, at this particular point in his life, now when he has done this, is so arrogant, is so full of himself, that he now puts everything he has known aside, the gods of his fathers, women, the whole thing, he puts them aside. He no longer has any interest in them because he views himself to be above all of them. That is what this is saying. It's contrast. He is very full of himself. And so, he will instead, verse 38, honor a god of fortresses or forces. He will honor, as it were, the god of power, a god whom his fathers did not know. He will honor it with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures, and he will take action against the strongest of fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and he will give great honor to those who acknowledge him, and will give them to rule over the many, and will parcel out land for a price. And that's an interesting one. Wait a minute, so he's doing all these things, and he's set up the abomination of desolation. He's sat in the temple, declared himself to be God. He's going around and showing regard for the people who follow him and fighting those who don't, and he sells real estate. Which is an interesting point, because what's tied here in this particular context is not to draw a connection, but rather to indicate his influence, that he goes, as it's been said at the beginning of the chapter, he goes into the richest parts of the realm and distributes. He goes in basically with a small force. He starts little and he grows into power, and in so doing and in gathering riches will distribute it to people who follow him, and then he'll get so powerful that he'll begin to conquer other lands and begin to sell those lands as well. That's the idea here. And then it carries on. And so this, among other places, are a couple of references to keep in mind. We've gone over 2 Thessalonians 2. The man of lawlessness will exalt himself, but then Paul adds he will sit in the temple and declare himself to be God. This is a recurring theme. So, who is this man? He's a man who claims himself to be God. He sits in the temple and declares himself the God of the Bible. He is called the son of perdition or destruction. He will magnify himself above every god, and he will be given authority to rule the nations and will war against the saints and overpower them. These are points most of us probably should be well aware of at this point, but note something. I mentioned earlier that the spirit of Antichrist, one of the goals is to deny that Jesus is the Christ, that the Jesus of the Bible is the Christ, that he had come in the flesh, which was not simply just Gnosticism, but rather they're trying to also create an opening for someone to come and claim to be God or Christ in the flesh. And here we have a guy in the flesh, a literal physical man who was born, who rises up to power, who then begins to exalt himself because of the power he has been given, and then will declare himself to be God in the flesh. So now the Antichrist is no longer just some random thing going around and poking holes in things. On the contrary, it's trying to create the opening for this guy. So here's another way to think of these characters, right? So we have the Antichrist, we have the man of lawlessness, we have the dragon that we've already covered, and the devil. So another way to keep these guys in a frame and to understand them is to do, or set them up as what I call the anti-trinity, the counterfeit trinity. We have the devil, who is the father, the man of lawlessness, who is the son, and the Antichrist, which is the spirit. And the more you think about this one, the more it actually starts to make sense. Because at first I had heard this from a different commentator, and I thought, but then I started digging into it. So the devil, Jesus refers to, when he's speaking to the people, he says, you are acting just like your father, the devil, the father of lies. And so that's okay. Yeah, it kind of makes some sense. But then we have the man of lawlessness and the Antichrist. And the man of lawlessness is called the son of destruction or the son of perdition. And this title is only ever given in the entirety of the Bible to two people. The first one we'll get into in a minute. But first, we have the spirit of Antichrist. So we say, okay, so the spirit, what do we mean by that? And I thought that was the guy. Well, yes and no. So we've already gone over the only references we have to the Antichrist. So how can we make sense of this? Well, in Ephesians chapter 6, he says, put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Now, many people on one side of the theological aisle will say yes, and they will begin rebuking demons and going around and saying everything is spiritual, and they look crazy. But then you have the other side, who says, well, this is all metaphorical, this is nothing more than picture, and it never will be anything more than just a theological picture, which I strongly disagree with, because at some point or another, as I've said before, we have to concede the point that there has to be some sort of spiritual realm with some sort of spiritual beings. I mean, what do we think God is? Who do we think the Holy Spirit is? What do we think Jesus is doing in heaven? What do we think heaven is? Angels, seraphim, cherubim? Do we just think these are only pictures? Because the Bible does not describe them that way. And so Paul already warns that the reason you put on the armor of God, you put on the helmet of salvation, you have the shield of faith, you have the sword of the word, you put these things on because we're not just warring against people. We're warring against things that are acting behind the scenes. So we know that. But just to add a little more to it, in Daniel 10, which I've referenced before, Daniel is specifically told by the angel who comes to answer his request that he was put at odds, he was delayed by what he calls the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece. And then Michael, who is the archangel, is also called your prince. And so we see this background conflict in the spiritual realm going back and forth and apparently having influence over even nations. So if the nations are controlled by spiritual forces behind the scenes, which I think is undeniable, the Antichrist is a spirit specifically tied to the last days, which John seems to be pretty clear about. And the beast represents nations, but is also personified. Now I'm going to do something that I will confess is not directly stated in the text, but I think, for the sake of understanding what's happening here, and I think it is a fairly reasonable thing to tie these things together, I think that the beast is the visualization of the spirit of Antichrist. Now, am I going to write books about this and run with this? No, not really, but I just think it helps to understand what we're looking at here. Because as much as we go into chapter 13 and say these are only pictures, the problem you run into is that Revelation does not limit them that way. Because you have this strange paradox of describing pictures, but then also talking about them like there's something more than that. So the Antichrist is a spirit who is visualized in the form of the beast. And then the man of lawlessness is called the son of perdition, or the son of destruction. Now that's an interesting title, because that title is, again, only used by two people. This guy, but you probably know the title from the previous title holder, Judas Iscariot, who Jesus references in John 17. While I was with them, I was keeping them in your name, which you have given me. And I guarded them, and not one of them perished, but the son of perdition, so that the scripture would be fulfilled. There was a particular man who was designated to be the one who would betray the Christ. And we know that man to be Judas Iscariot, Luke 22:3, and Satan entered into Judas, who was called Iscariot, belonging to the number of the 12. And this son of destruction, you could literally translate more to the one born to destruction, the one whose purpose is for destruction. It is in his nature. He is like a vessel that was designed to hold something so that it would then be destroyed. It's like if you go out to a sporting goods place and you buy a container of tannerite. Its whole purpose is to contain it so that when the impact hits, it blows out. That's its point, is a vessel of destruction. And so Judas Iscariot was designated as the son of perdition, the son of destruction. And then in Luke 22, Satan enters into Judas and off he goes to carry off his task. And that's in stark contrast to Peter, who Jesus informs to Peter's face that Satan was asking to sift him. Satan was asking to get into Peter, but Jesus would not let him. And so the only person we really have an example of Satan actually entering that we are told is Judas Iscariot. But he is given this title, the son of perdition. And the only other person who is given that title is the man of lawlessness, which is what Paul ascribes to him, the man of lawlessness, the son of destruction. So the man of lawlessness is the son of perdition who is possessed either by the spirit of Antichrist, the devil himself, or both. Basically, what you could say is that here we have this man who is possessed by this spirit to basically become a false Christ embodied. And in case that sounds a little crazy, Daniel 8:23-26, which I will briefly read here. Speaking of a little horn who rises up, who exalts and magnifies himself, in the latter period of their rule, when the transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue. His power will be mighty, but not by his own power. And he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will. And he will destroy mighty men and the holy people, and through his shrewdness he will cause deceit to succeed by his influence. And he will magnify himself in his heart. And he will destroy many while they are at ease. And he will even oppose the prince of princes. But he will be broken without human agency. The vision of the evenings and mornings, which has been told, is true, but keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. And then his vision ends. And that's fascinating to me, because this man has been given authority, he's been given power, he's been given the ability to do what he's going to do, but it's not coming from simply himself. This power has been given to him from an outside source. The dragon gives all authority to the beast. And the beast's authority is personified on the ground in the world by this man. And so in 2 Thessalonians 2:8-10, then that lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming. That is, the one whose coming is in accord with the activity of Satan, with all power and signs and false wonders, and with all the deception of wickedness for those who perish because they did not receive the love of the truth so as to be saved. And what's interesting is, that man's end. That he will be killed not by men, not by other nations, but specifically by not only God, but by his word. Which is exactly in keeping with the way that the horn is described in Daniel 7, in Daniel 8, and Daniel 11. The horn meets his end, but not at the hands of people. So the Antichrist is a spiritual entity which seeks to deny that Jesus is the Christ in order to deceive the nations into believing that the man of lawlessness is actually the Christ, or at least God. The last great kingdom is the beast on the earth, who is also the embodiment of the Antichrist, in order to bring in the reign of the man of lawlessness. So it is, as it were, a vessel through which he can rise to power. And the man of lawlessness is a man possessed by the spirit of Antichrist, who will claim to be God when he reigns over the world through the beast. So this is how we're going to start filtering through and sectioning these different titles off in their proper place. So that's why whenever I'm referring to the man, the last king, I don't generally refer to him as the Antichrist, not because he's not possessed, but because that title is not given to him. That title is given specifically to the spirit of Antichrist, which was already at work in John's day. It's been hard at work for the last 2,000 years, just to keep things in their proper place. So we will cover each of these as we go through the rest of this chapter. We will tag, for example, as we go through this chapter, in Revelation 13, we will talk about the beast being given a mouth, uttering great boasts. But what is the beast? Now let's finally get to our chapter at hand. Right, so we've begun to set up the context. We think, all right, now we can go to Revelation 13. Almost. But if you read Revelation 13, you will recognize the terminology and the imagery here, specifically as it is tied to the beast. This is not the first time we've heard this. So let's get a little history on the beast here. Let's go back in time, back in previous texts, and see where this thing comes from, because this is not our first time seeing it. Daniel chapter 2, 19 through 45. Should be familiar to any Bible scholars or people who are generally familiar with Bible stories. We know of Daniel. We know of what Daniel did, some of his history. And Daniel was famous for a couple of things, but one of them was his ability to interpret dreams. And so in Daniel chapter 2, starting at verse 19, remember Nebuchadnezzar has come to his various people and he said, I had a dream and no one's able to answer me what this dream means. And so Daniel is now been given the answer to it. And so in 19, he says, then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. And then Daniel blessed the God of heaven, and Daniel said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. Now what he says here, it is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. So he's already knowing now what the vision means, that this pertains to the rising and falling of kings. Therefore Daniel went in to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon, and he went and spoke to him as follows. Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me into the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation to the king. Then Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel into the king's presence and spoke to him as follows. I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king. And the king said to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? And Daniel answered before the king and said, as for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners were able to declare to the king. So just know, this is not coming from your so-called wise men. However, there is a God of heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream, and the visions in your mind while on your bed. As for you, O king, while on your bed, your thoughts turn to what would take place in the future. And he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me, more than in any other living man, but for the purpose that making the interpretation known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. In other words, don't tag this on Daniel. This is God showing him the future. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of the statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. And that's interesting, because often we would think the stone would come from the sky and hit head first to make its way down, but that's not where this stone hits. It goes straight for the feet. The stone being cut out without hands is clearly an allusion to Christ. And so, it aims for the feet. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time, and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell you its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the Son of Men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has caused you to rule them all. You are the head of gold. After you, there will arise another kingdom, inferior to you. Then another kingdom of bronze, and it will rule over the earth. So the qualification is that this is a kingdom which rules in some way or another the world, but the quality degrades as you work your way down. Then there will be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron. And as much as iron crushes and shatters all things, so, like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom. but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. So at the end, you'll have a kingdom that is split up. It has multiple rulers and opinions, and it's not exactly cohesive. But it still has to meet the qualifications of ruling in some way the world. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay. They will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as the iron does not combine with pottery. And in the days of those kings, the last ones, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for other people. It will crush and put an end to all those kingdoms, but it itself will endure forever. And as much as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future, so the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. So in other words, in his vision, Nebuchadnezzar saw the end of the reign of men, the end of the world's kingdoms, and the introduction of the kingdom of Christ, which will go on forever. So naturally, Daniel probably thought, well, this is the highlight of my life. I mean, boy, how could you possibly top that one? Daniel chapter 7. Suddenly we go forward in time, and Daniel gets another vision. Now, I could read the whole chapter. I would love to read the whole chapter, but time does not permit. So, you should read the whole chapter. But, we go on, starting at, let's say, verse 1, and we'll work our way through different parts of it here. In the first year of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. And then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. There's something to note. Staring, and he's looking over at a sea, at a shoreline, and the winds are stirring it up. And four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion, and had wings of the eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a human mind also was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, and it had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth, and it devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and the 3 of the first horns were pulled up out of the roots before it, and behold, the horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. And we carry on, of course, these destroyed, the Ancient of Days comes, the Son of Man comes. And then later Daniel asked for interpretation down in verse 15. He was distressed, he was bothered. This particular vision was worrisome to him. And so I approached one of those, in verse 16, who were standing by and began to ask him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will rise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. Now there's an allusion to that stone that he saw earlier, a kingdom that will reign forever. But then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, which had teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely, that horn which had the eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts, and which was now larger in appearance than its associates. So it started small, but is now larger. And I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was passed in the favor of the saints of the highest one, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. So he just reiterated all this, but what's the meaning of this beast? So the man said, Thus the 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth, and tread it down, and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them. And he will be different from the previous ones, and will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High, and will wear down the saints of the Highest One. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But note how he ends. But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. And then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the Highest One. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. Okay, so there's more history. This one in particular ties directly to Revelation 13, which is where we finally catch up. So we have the final great kingdom seen in Daniel 2. We have the kingdom of the horn, which is zeroed in on and somewhat elaborated in Daniel chapter 8. And in Daniel chapter 11, it describes the life and politics of the king. And then in Daniel 12, we get into the Great Tribulation. And then, of course, Daniel 7, we have the breakdown of the beast and so on. And now in chapter 13, we finally, having just perused these subjects, now get to tie them together. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. We were picking up where we left off. Remember, previous chapter, the dragon has a history with trying to destroy the woman who is Israel. He's not been allowed to. And then in the future, there's war in heaven initiated by God to kick Satan and his angels out. Satan hits the ground. As soon as he hits the ground, he realizes what's just happened. The clock has started ticking. His time is running out. So the first thing he tries to do is destroy the woman. Still not allowed to. So then the next thing, he decides he's going to the rest of the world to make war with the rest of her children, those who keep the testimony of Jesus. And with that as his mission now, he wants to persecute those who hold to the testimony of Jesus. That's his goal. The first thing he does is go to the seashore. And he stands on the sand of the seashore and summons up the beast. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems or crowns, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. So normally, if you just simply pull this verse out and you just started glancing at it, you think, okay, that's weird, that's interesting. But then you read it in light of all the context that we already know. Now when we read this, we don't have to go and pick through the different words and figure out what they mean. We've already been told what they mean, and we're now about to be given more information. Because John, I believe, almost with certainty, that as soon as he saw that beast come up out of the ocean, he had to realize what he was looking at. Something was different about it, but it was very similar. So the beast from the sea is a kingdom. It is comprised of 7 nations that have been gathered together. It has 10 kings who rule it, who come from the 7 nations. It is a new kingdom which rules over the earth. So this is not one that's been around before. This is a brand new one. And it will only rule the earth for 42 months, which means that it does not have that power prior. So don't go looking around for a kingdom that looks like this. You won't see it in this form until the Great Tribulation has begun. So you'll probably see semblances of it. It's almost like when they're building large machinery and you see trucks going down the road with pieces of it. But as far as the actual assembly of it, when it shows up, the clock ticks on it too. It will only go for 3.5 years, 1,260 days, 42 months, that's it. So that means, by implication, you will not see this thing, at least not in its final form, until that clock begins to count down. So here's a rough outline of this structure. And you can look at the structure a few different ways. You can try to make sense of what it is you're looking at. But what stands out to me is almost how simple it is. So ignore trying to apply it for a minute. Don't try to think, all right, have I seen a nation like this before? Maybe this is the UN and the number is just symbolic. Maybe this is NATO. Maybe this is whatever Russia's coming up with. I mean, maybe stop. Don't do that. First thing we have to do is just figure out what's being said here. And we know through other texts generally what these things represent. I can't tell you what their fulfillment is, but I can tell you what they are. So the beast itself is one large kingdom, but it is not a single nation. It is comprised of multiple nations. So each head represents a kingdom, a nation. And on each of those heads is a horn, which represents a king. which means that you have 7 nations who have banded together. They've decided to form some sort of agreement to form one big giant nation, and they pick out 10 of the rulers from each of those 7 kingdoms to come together. The diadems or the crowns basically just represent the fact that these are, in fact, the rulers. They are not just random politicians. These have to be the heads of state, as it were. And so they are there, and you note, of course, that the beast looks like the beast in Daniel 7, but something's different. Rather than separate beasts, they're now all combined as one. These are no longer separate. So didn't Daniel 7 say that they were all devoured and trampled and crushed? Doesn't that mean they don't exist? No, because in Daniel 7, it says that after the Son of Man comes and defeats the beast, the 3 other kingdoms, the lion, the bear, and the leopard, are given what it calls an extension of life, meaning they're allowed to persist a little longer. So they're not actually annihilated, they are absorbed. When it devours them, it's pulling them into one big, giant conglomerate of nations. So you have some nation that has 10 kings who will then beat the other nations and combine them into itself. So if we compare that to Daniel 7, we start with one nation that looks like a lion. Then we add another one to the scene, a bear. And then we add another one to the scene, a leopard. But note, the leopard has 4 heads, not 1, unlike the others. And so the leopard represents some sort of nation that already is combined of 4 others. And then finally we have a 4th beast who shows up, and he is different from the rest. And I've mentioned it before, but it bears repeating. It is fascinating to note that the 4th beast has no likeness ascribed to it. Here we have a lion, we have a bear, we have a leopard, but the 4th beast is not given a likeness. This is a nation which will exist that has no predecessor. It does not look like, or nor is it structured like, a nation that has been there before. No nation before this has had the power like this one has had. It is unique. So this is how Daniel 7 sees them. But then, this one subdues the others. It brings them under itself and becomes one giant nation. But then, something happens after that. A horn rises up, a new horn. Something new pops up. So after this has been formed, after it's gathered and beaten the others into submission and absorbs them into itself, it becomes one giant global authority. All 10 kings have gotten on their thrones, as it were, and are now ruling. Then a new guy shows up. A new guy rides, as it were, up the roles of authority into a position of prominence. And he starts as a little horn. He's a little king. But the wording that Daniel uses describes him as not rising up and beating up the other 3 that are pushed out of its place. The word is uproot. It's like a tooth growing up, and that in growing, it pushes out the others. They are moved out as it grows. And then, I am sorry for this crude illustration, I could not find a better way to do it, but it grows bigger and is given the eyes of a man and a mouth, uttering great boasts. This is about as close as I could get. But that's important, because what it's saying is that this particular king now has something the others don't. This one, unlike the others who seem to work together, this one now is larger in appearance than the others and is now boasting. It has a mouth, it talks, and it talks very, very loud. It is very full of itself, similar to, of course, Daniel 7, not only in referencing the horn there, but also in 2 Thessalonians and Daniel 11 and so on. This horn magnifies itself. It grows above the others, and so now the others are subdued under it. And so you can then see a few points. These nations start separately. The beast does not just show up out of a vacuum. It builds, it grows, it absorbs others. The new nation is unlike any nation before it, as it will conquer and absorb the 3 prior nations into itself and make one giant kingdom. The 10 kingdoms were originally part of the 4th beast, and they will remain in power. But an 11th king will rise up through this newly created kingdom. And per Revelation 17, we're actually told that the 10 kings who were there before, this was always their plan. That when they gathered together these other nations, apparently they seemed to sell it as some kind of I don't know, similar to NATO, for example, where we'll all work together, but don't worry, each guy gets to keep his sovereign nation. But it actually says that the 10 kings, their whole point, their whole purpose was to give all of their authority to the beast. Their end game is to just turn it into one giant powerhouse of a nation. So that's how Daniel sees the beast. Now we translate that, 7 nations with 10 kings, with an 11th king popping up after it's formed, and now we convert that back to Revelation 13. So now Daniel sees this beast, and now the timeline starts to make a little more sense. Because if we compare it to Daniel's timeline, you have the 3 prior, the 4th beast arrives, he absorbs the others, and is destroyed by God. What John is not doing is he's not creating a new timeline. He's zooming in on the timeline. He's zooming in on a particular point within that timeline, because we know that the beast that Daniel saw is given authority for a time, times, and half a time, and then the authority is taken away and given to the saints of the highest one. And so when John's looking at it, he has zoomed in on this particular period of time where it has authority, 42 months. He is zeroed in now on this particular point. So when Daniel first is introduced to the beast, they're separate. But when John is introduced to it, he is now seeing it when it has already subdued the others. The 11th king has not risen up yet. There's only 10 horns. It will show up in a minute. But this is when he is now introduced to the scene. So he is now being given more detail about this. Other things to note about the beast as we start to wind this down is it has blasphemous names on its head. There was obviously a lot of discussion on this. Daniel 11:36, the king will do as he pleases and exalts and magnifies himself above every god and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. So it makes sense that this thing, the nations that are a part of it, would be given new names of blasphemy. Blasphemy does not, by the way, directly mean that it's fighting God. Blasphemy can also, again, be a substitute for God. So it doesn't mean that it has to say, I hate God. Sometimes the beast can be saying, I am God. 2 Thessalonians 2:4, he opposes and exalts himself above every so-called god or object of worship, takes a seat in the temple, declaring himself to be God. All right, so again, that fits, but why are these on the heads? Revelation 17:13, John sees the woman on the beast, and the beast was full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So it's full of it. So there's a couple ways to take this, but I like the way Albert Barnes phrased it. Said that the whole power was blasphemous in its claims and pretensions. The word blasphemy here seems to be used in the sense that titles and attributes were claimed by it which belonged only to God. The meaning here is that each one of these heads appeared to have a frontlet, or a sort of plate or title, with an inscription that was blasphemous, or that ascribed some attribute to this power that properly belonged to God, and that the whole power thus assumed was in derogation of the attributes and claims of God. And so, in other words, this thing is labeling itself now as in the stead of God. And after all, that makes sense. If you have a man who shows up and says, I am now God in the flesh, then it would make sense then that he would start putting these sorts of titles all over the place. And on top of that, the dragon gives him his power and great authority. This is the other thing that's said about the beast. It has blasphemous names, and the dragon gave him his power and his throne and authority. Of this, Barnes said that Satan claimed in the times of the Savior that all power over the kingdoms of the world, so he claimed these were his to give out, and that he asserted that he could give them to whomever he pleased. The devil comes and says, these are all mine. I'm willing to give them to you if you just bow down and worship me. And so now here we have this beast, and the dragon is giving everything he has into this. In other words, the dragon is putting all of his chips in this corner. He's putting all of his stock here. He's investing everything in this beast, and he's pouring everything out. And that's within character of this dragon just having been cast out of heaven and realizing his time is short. This is it. This is all he has left. So now here's a fun question. Is the beast real? Or is it simply a metaphor and nothing more? Because one of the problems you run with is, imagery, but we run into a problem. When it personifies the beast and it speaks of it as an individual, it's not speaking of the horn, it's speaking of the entire thing. There's been much discussion about why it is that happens. So here's what I believe. Now, you can take this or leave this. I just think this makes more sense to me. The only reason I think I would have issue with it is if I was just embarrassed to say it, but I'm not, so too bad. The beast is a picture of a coming literal kingdom, which will reign over the earth for 1,260 days, 42 months, 3.5 years. It is a metaphor, a picture for something that is coming. That's very clear. And simultaneous to that, it is also, in some way or another, a literal demonic being. This is why we start to make sense of certain things. So this was the paradox that I had when reading this. How, then, is the beast thrown into the lake of fire? If it is nothing more than a metaphor, then what's that metaphor for? The kingdom is like a glove with 7 fingers, and the beast is the hand which controls it. That's another way to look at it. That the beast is, as it were, the force behind the principalities and the powers of darkness that are controlling the kings and the nations which rule it, and the glove itself is the appearance that we see on the earth in terms of the government. This is how Revelation can talk about it as a kingdom, but also as an individual, and also how it is thrown into the lake of fire. Because let's ask a question. Who was the lake of fire made for? It was designed for the devil and his angels. This was designed for the devil and his beings that follow after him, and then those whose names are not found written in the book of life are thrown in with him. It wasn't made for them, it was made for the devil and his angels. And so, oddly enough, the first occupants of the lake of fire is not the devil, it's the beast and the false prophet. And so I think organizationally it makes sense, and categorically it makes sense to say that this is the visualization, this beast is the visualization of the spirit of Antichrist now, as it were, at the helm, controlling things. Satan will put everything he has into this beast, and this is the means by which he will persecute the church, attempt to destroy Israel, and will go to war against Christ upon his return. This is, as it were, his vehicle. But in all those references, you will find a constant theme of doom for the beast and the king who rules it. Every time it's mentioned, it also adds, as it were, a footnote saying, oh, by the way, and this is the one who's going to lose. Over and over again. Also, there's a reason that the man of lawlessness is called the son of destruction. So we say, all right, son of destruction, does that mean then that he is one who destroys? He is known for destroying things, but that's not. I guarantee this man does not like that title, because again, that title references a vessel that was designed to house something so that it could be destroyed, and this man is basically being called a vessel for destruction. We want to be vessels of honor, not dishonor. This man is a vessel of destruction. So if we go chapter 19. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies assembled to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his armies, against Christ. And notice and they fought it out, and the war went for 3 days. It doesn't say that. They gather themselves. It says that the king pitches his tent in a valley between the sea and Zion. He, in his last effort, in his height of his power, will pitch his tent and his armies, and they will get ready to finally destroy Israel, and they will gather together. And so he gathers himself and all of his armies, trillions of people all gathered together, and they assembled themselves to make war against him. Finally, they will fight him face to face. And the beast was seized. I mean, it's like it would just fly over them and go straight for the beast. And the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet, who was performing the signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire, which burns with brimstone. And the rest were killed with the sword, which came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. They're doomed. This man is called the son of destruction because he is doomed to it. As Judas was doomed to destruction, so this man. And what's fascinating to me is that Judas and his fall and his betrayal of Christ was tied to the Son of Man in his first coming. And so too then is the second son of destruction. He is tied to the second coming of the Son of Man. So we've got a lot more to cover in this. This is just the introduction to the first few verses. I'm going to try to hit as many points as I can as they tie together. But this is basically just some housekeeping to get things in order so that as we go through it, we can then start to make sense. Because as I said at the beginning, we will have to hit this point again and again and again and again. But it matters, because one of the things you can ask yourself is, all right, well, what do I do with this? Well, what do you think you do with it? John was told that these were given so that we would know because the time is near and that we would understand and heed or take action based on them. And the warning of the big bad guy, the antagonist coming in the end, is in the form of a government, in the form of something that claims to be Christian, that will try to subvert Christianity with as many fakes as possible. Jesus alludes to this in Matthew 24 twice. That false Christ will come and nation will rise against nation. There will be international conflicts, which Revelation already alludes to at the beginning. Now here we're just being given the specifics of what exactly is happening. So when we carry on with this, keep that in mind, because there's a lot more to be said about the subject, and we are not to the hardest part yet. Just wait till we get to the number of the beast, because if any of you have wisdom to understand, let me know. But we'll get there when we get there. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for this glimpse into what Daniel got to see and John got to see in the prophets. But I ask that we look carefully, that we consider these things carefully as you have instructed us to do, and that we take them seriously. And when looking for these things, we do not become lost in the cause of the world. We don't become deceived by all the false Christs who will show up. But I thank you that you have given us the sure means to withstand this, to withstand the temptation, the deception, and the enemy. Because one thing they can't do, and that is change your word, which stands the same. And so I ask that in knowing that, we actually look at it, and we familiarize ourselves with it, and armor ourselves up with it. So when this time comes, we will be the servant who is ready for what comes on the other side of this. So thank you for this time, for the opportunity, and for the clarity that you give. It is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.